And protests in Hong Kong continue even after city leader Carrie Lam made a formal announcement to withdraw the proposed extradition bill that sparked off these protests months ago. All this while allegations of U.S. interference swirl from Beijing. Now that officials have backed off that controversial bill, why are Hong Kongers still taking to the streets? For more on that, let's turn to investigative journalist Ben Swann. So Ben, officials have caved on at least one of these demands from the protesters. Why are these people still out there?
Well, they caved on the most important demand, it would seem, because it was the initial demand that sparked all of this, right? This demand that this extradition bill be withdrawn. The extradition bill would have allowed people in Hong Kong to be extradited to mainland China, and obviously these protesters did not want that. The reason they're still there, though, is they have a total of 5 demands that they're asking for. 4 have not been met, only 1 has been, and so the chants are now apparently, not one less than all 5. So they want all 5 of these demands to be met. And those demands include no longer labeling these protests as riots, also allowing people in Hong Kong to choose their own leaders, investigating police brutality during the protests, and also retracting the unconditional release of all demonstrators. So those are essentially the other 4 that remain. Will they get all 4 of those additional ones? I don't know. I doubt they're going to get to choose their own leaders, but who knows? I mean, if they keep this up long enough, they might be able to.
Okay, so a lot of these demands are actually born from the protests themselves.
Right, they're secondaries. Mm-hmm.
Okay, gotcha. So now Beijing, though, appears to be kind of dismissive, of the sentiment coming from the protesters. They're essentially denying that, any of this is organic. They point the finger at Washington. Would they be wrong, Ben, to connect any of these anecdotal dots?
No, I don't think they're wrong to connect those dots. Look, I think that it's wrong to assume that this is entirely the product of Western interference, entirely the product of the U.S. going in there and creating some kind of discord and strife. I don't think that's true. I think the people in Hong Kong genuinely were upset by this idea. I think they genuinely, many of these young people said we're saying no to this extradition bill, and the only way to do that is through marches, through shutting down airports, and in some cases through violence. I mean, violence against people I don't think is acceptable on any level, but sometimes there is, I think, an acceptable amount of violence in terms of damage that's done in order to get attention. I think that's what's happened here in some of those cases. However, that doesn't mean that once these protests began, that the U.S. stayed out of them. And I think that there is some evidence that the U.S., and specifically through the CIA, has gone in there and tried to create more unrest and create additional problems. So I think in the beginning, yes, it was born out of genuine concern, but I'm not sure that all of it has remained that way.
And Ben, a lot of people are drawing comparisons from Hong Kong to Ukraine. Do you see any comparisons to the color revolution here?
Well, I think it's very different. First of all, when you talk about Ukraine and what's kind of happened there, obviously the U.S. has kind of, and the Western countries have sown discord in a lot of these different countries. The difference with Ukraine and some of those orange revolutions was, I think, the military involvement, and not meaning U.S. military, but kind of funding weapons and getting weapons to revolutionaries. There was a different level of interference that took place in Ukraine. I think this is certainly different on a lot of levels, but when you do see the American flags being flown and the Star Spangled Banner being sung, that's a little bit different. So I'm not sure exactly how you would compare the two. I do think that right now what the protesters they have the wind at their back. They've gotten what they asked for initially. I think the problem becomes, do they push too hard at this point? And it's not for me to decide that for them. Obviously, these are their rights that they're fighting for. This is their future they're fighting for. They have to decide. The problem will become if there are outside forces that are pushing their own agendas, if the U.S. is involved pushing its own agenda, then it undermines the true push for democracy and the true push for individual or human rights that is being fought for here. And the U.S. has the potential to undermine that by getting involved.
Well, you and I both know that the U.S. has a long history of toppling governments and subversive and supplant actions all over the world. And
a lot of failures in that space.
Yes, a failure in the wake of supplanting governments.
Yeah.
And Ben, lastly, how, if at all, does this ongoing U.S.-China trade war play into all of this?
Well, I think it certainly has an effect on it. Look, and it goes even beyond just the trade war itself. The U.S. has been making a lot of noise about China now for well over a decade. And there's a lot of concerns about, yes, trade and the economic disparity, but China owns so much of our debt. And so in some cases, there is a resentment towards China. In other cases, there's a continued dependency on China. And that's where I think this relationship, there is a very strange kind of push-pull relationship between the U.S. and China. At the same time, we know that the U.S. wants to create, subversive problems in so many countries around the world. It's just part of our MO. It's what we do. So the idea that the U.S. is not involved is simply, I don't think anyone can believe that, even if we weren't, even if the U.S. has nothing to do with it. It's hard to make that case when we've done it so many times before, and we know we'll do it so many times in the future.
Yeah, totally easy assumption to arrive at. We will leave it right there. Ben Swann, thank you so much for your take today.
Manila, thanks.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.